Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
And I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin.
Deported from the United States, for many the only home they've ever known. In this episode of The Stream, we'll hear their stories.
Before we meet them, take a look at deportation as seen through the eyes of people whose relatives were sent away.
The first thing that immediately was asked, since it was Border Patrol, they were like, you guys have papers? And my uncle, my aunt, and my mother didn't. So all three of them were taken in.
He got stopped for speeding or something, and he's undocumented, and they took him in, like they detained him. I mean, I was just a little kid. Like my family was taken away from me.
Me and my dad were able to see her handcuffed and being put into this van where they were taking a lot of people who had order of deportation. So we had plans that my mom would wait until Monday to speak to our lawyer. But it was Sunday morning when she called us, and she was in Nogales, Mexico. And so she was already deported.
President Donald Trump has rolled out controversial immigration enforcement plans, but the deportation of immigrants from the United States stems from way before he took office.
Many of those deported had little or no connection to the country they were sent to, with some not even knowing the local language.
So what happened to the millions of people deported under previous administrations? Well, here to help us talk about this, Hector Barajas, founder of the Deported Veterans Support House in Tijuana, Mexico. Also in Tijuana, Nancy Landa. She's a migration scholar and the co-founder of Inmigrante, an initiative working to monitor migration policies. EDDIE ANZORA is the founder of English Cool. That's a school in El Salvador working to teach other Salvadorans English as a second language. And in the U.S. state of Texas, Roque Planas. He's a national reporter for the Huffington Post. Welcome everyone to The Stream. Now, a large part of the conversation online around deportations involves clearing up misconceptions. So take a look at what a few deportees want people to know.
My baby, my son, my wife, Maria, I left them behind. It's hers. Bahar. Yeah, for drinking in public, tickets. That ain't nothing.
Para mí los deportados son criminales que usan drogas, que venden drogas, que matan, que asesinan, que extorsionan. Para mí ellos son los criminales. Yo no le veo lo malo al hombre que trabaja, que va a ganarse la vida.
Hector, do you think people think of veterans when they think of those who are deported?
No, that's something that most people don't talk about, and most people, when they hear that veterans are being deported, they think that they're undocumented, and most of us actually had some kind of legal residency. And the reason we were deported is because we did get into some type of trouble and some kind of conviction, and eventually that our green card was taken away. So most people don't know that's part of our job, that we're trying to raise awareness. And I wanted to point out is that this is a very important topic, because everybody's fighting for the people that are back in the United States, for the 11 million. But once you're deported, most of the laws and bills are not geared to bring us home. And so it's a very important topic to talk about.
So tell us part of your story. I know you came to the U.S. at 6 years old, and you spent about 5 years, 10 months in the military, and now you're in Mexico.
Yes, I spent in the military 5 years, 10 months with the 82nd Airborne U.S. Army. Honorably discharged after the service. I got into trouble. I went to prison, and I was eventually deported in 2004. And I'm actually currently in the process of citizenship because of my military service. So I was supposed to find out on Friday if I become an American citizen, but it could be maybe another week or so if I might be able to return back home.
Well, you know, many people wondering the very same thing, sending us video comments, lots of personal stories. I wanted to throw this to you, coming from Azul. Take a listen to this, and then we'll come to you, Nancy.
My name is Azul Uribe. I am a deportee with a 10-year ban and have been in Mexico for 7.5 years. And one of the biggest issues I feel is that U.S. movements treat deportees as though they have died. There's very little contact, there's very little attempt to acknowledge that we have a voice for ourselves and can speak for ourselves and are living and making inroads and thriving in spite of all of this.
Nancy, obviously we heard from Hector about some of the challenges, but you know, that's speaking to the humanity of these people who are deported. Can you relate to that?
Definitely. I've been in Mexico for 7 years now. Very public about my story for the past 4. But I feel that our stories get very little platform in the United States, are very little included in the conversation about human rights, about family reunification, our return to the U.S. and continuing our lives in our homes that we created in the U.S. is very little included, not only in the reforms and policies, but also in the U.S. movement. Like I Azul mentioned, we pretty much don't exist once we don't live in the United States, and our fight. It's more complicated south of the border. We're also very invisible in Mexico. And Mexico, even with over 2 million deportees who have arrived in the past decade, has done very little to help with the reintegration of people that we've arrived here.
And on that note, we have another comment that's talking about how people are actually treated. Let me just put this to you. When we talk about this, Eddie, do you feel like many people wondering that you've committed a crime? We have Olanza saying, do you accept the fact that being illegally in a sovereign country is a crime? Do you think that it's enough to say that you should be deported by virtue of being in the country illegally? That's a crime?
Well, living here in El Salvador, what I learned a lot lately has been that no matter what, you need laws. So I believe that, yes, if you break a law, there should be some way that you have to pay for the consequences, because what happens in El Salvador is that a lot of laws are not enforced. Now, as far as the punishment of sending somebody out of the country, it's been hard. It's been hard. I grew up in California since they took me there when I was 2 years old, and then I've been here for I'm a complete 10 years. So could I have gotten killed because of this deportation? A long time ago, a lot of my friends have gotten killed in this country. A lot of co-workers have gotten killed. Why? Because they don't understand the terrain or what's going on here, what's really happening in this country. So yes, we are stigmatized. It's changed a lot here in El Salvador for the fact that call centers are here and a lot of people are trying to work. But other than that, when you're seen as a deported person here in El Salvador, they think that for sure you've done something bad, and you have to prove yourself that you're not a bad person. So, but to answer your question, I feel like if they're going to deport somebody, it needs to be pretty, I feel like it has to be something serious to a point where if they don't want you in the country, it's not our country, then it is what it is. I kind of accepted the fact.
And Eddie, I'm glad you brought that up. You said something serious, because Nancy, as you mentioned, the U.S. was your home for more than 20 years, almost 20 years. And then you told our producers ahead of the show that you feel that you were the victim of notary fraud. Can you explain for us what happened?
Well, yeah, like many people in the U.S., there's sometimes very little legal routes to become legal. This argument that people have about, well, do it the right way, why couldn't you get in line? There was no line for us. I didn't have a choice of going into the United States as an undocumented immigrant at 9 years old, and we sought help to be able to get our situation aligned, but very little is seen of how people take advantage of our situation, our legal situation, and that happened with our family, with the notary, who put us on track on a political asylum process, and later on we became victims of a process that exposed us to immigration, and that's what led to our deportation.
So, okay, can you give us some context here for what we're seeing? We're hearing three different stories, but clearly there is a common bond there that people have been in the United States for years at a time, 20 plus years, and then all of a sudden have a new place that they are being forced to call home.
Absolutely. Well, I want to touch on an issue that I think is very important that you all hit on a little bit earlier, which is that, are people who have problems with the immigration system criminals? One of the things that we've seen, it's been one of the broad trends over the last 2 decades, is the increasing intertwining of our criminal justice system and our immigration system, right? On the one hand, you have the civil immigration system, which is where the deportation proceeding occurs. And on the other hand, you have the criminal system. Now, many people would argue that if you have a problem with law enforcement, and then you serve your time in jail, that is a separate process from the immigration system. But what's happened over time is that we now, or the United States has, under Obama and now less so, prioritized removing people that have criminal convictions with the idea that these are bad people, when in reality, virtually everyone has some contact with the law enforcement system, regardless of your status. One of the things that I think is really important to understand as people sort of see this politicization of sanctuary jurisdictions and so forth is that probably the number one contributing factor that lands people in deportation proceedings is the over-policing of communities of color, and immigrant communities largely fall under that.
And obviously you're talking on one side of the border there, Roque, but Nancy, earlier you were critical of the government for their lack of, really handling and tackling this problem. Listen to what Azul sent, this follow-up criticism of the Mexican government. I'm curious your thoughts. Take a listen.
The Mexican government feigns victimization without acknowledging how they silence returnees and deportees through dreamer tourism.
Nancy, is that true?
Definitely. I mean, we've seen in the past year and a half, dreamers or people who have received DACA since 2012, they've been able to have the possibility of traveling outside of the U.S. and returning through an invitation for a conference, or as long as you're able to have a reason to be able to return on a humanitarian purpose or educational purpose. And we've seen, at least 7 delegations of DACA recipients who visited Mexico, and who the government here has put the red carpet to them, have them meet with politicians, while at the same time they have very little understanding of what it is to be in Mexico without having the mobility of going back to the United States, and also not having to live a forced return and having to indefinitely stay in Mexico. So our government is very hypocritical. Our government hasn't really done anything or having any programs to guarantee long-term reinsertion of people here. And we have to sort of fight to be visible, because when the U.S. government says we support dreamers or people coming back to Mexico, is these delegations, is the people who might be coming under a Trump administration, but they completely have forgotten about the deportees under the Obama administration, and we're close to 2 million.
So Hector, I'd like you to pick up there on what happens when you touch foot in Mexico. What were you greeted with? What were your challenges? What was that even like?
The first time I've been deported twice. The first time I was deported, they basically opened up a door, but there was nobody waiting for me. I just had to find my own way. The second time I was deported, I did. The Mexico does receive you at a little office, and they give you a sandwich, let you make a phone call, and now you're out the door. That's why we have places like this, and there's a lot of organizations
we get
at the borders.
Pupusa.
Especially, there you go.
We don't get a sandwich. Or a taco.
Eddie, what did you get instead of a sandwich? What did you get?
We got our traditional dish called pupusas. So we get like 2 pupusas and a coffee, and that's basically welcome back. And they check our tattoos. Sorry to cut you off there too, but sure. They check our tattoos, and it's pretty much your family members wait for you outside if you have family members. Over here in El Salvador, the best thing to do is try to have somebody pick you up, because you don't want to go to uncharted territories, because that's how most of the guys get killed here.
So I want to give our viewers a sense of what Hector and Eddie are saying vis-a-vis what their governments are saying. So this is El Salvador government. Several tweets on this issue of welcoming returnees. Here, let's focus on this one. Furthermore, we are working to improve the reception process and to specialize the attention. So that's out of El Salvador.
Can I add something else?
Yes, but let me show this one. Let me show this one, Hector, and then I'll let you add, because I'm actually curious in your thoughts on this one. So this is from the Mexican government. The contact with our repatriated countrymen and women is marked by constant learning and empathy. The first thing they need is a hug of solidarity. And you can see someone replied there and said, a hug? Sure. No, they need job security. So Hector, your thoughts?
And that's what we do here at the support houses. We help them get their IDs. We have volunteer psychologists. We have housing, long-term housing, not just 10 days. like in some shelters. So that's part of what the government needs to do is an actual integration. The United States call it repatriation, but how can you be repatriated to a country you don't really know? You don't know the language, you don't know the exchange system, you don't know how the medical system works. And that's what some of the organizations that are set up on the borders, that what we're doing is we're trying to catch these men and women before they like you said, before like Eddie said earlier, before they go out into the places where they could get involved in gangs or drugs or prostitution and all these things, or even by the local police department. We're always targeted by the police department out here as well because we're deportees.
And Eddie, when you
Same
go
thing.
ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, I wanted to add on this particular point of the hug and, I mean, the rhetoric of the government. I mean, we had Enrique Peña Nieto, our government in Mexico, go to the airport to greet 120-something deportees, the first deportees that arrived from LA to Mexico City under the Obama administration. And to me, it was so ridiculous that, you know, he made it such a promotional thing where he said, look, you know, here we welcome you, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, he didn't have any programs to really offer to returnees. So for me, this sort of, you know, let me give you a hug is very superficial, because at the end of the day, what we need is programs. What we need is actual help. And it just shows the lack of sensitivity from our public officials here in Mexico and how they use migrants for their own political purposes. And I just wanted to remind our listeners that for Mexico, it's going to be a very complicated political situation, because coming up in 2018, there's going to be national elections. And you're going to see people jumping off the bandwagon of supporting and being for immigrants, but at the end of the day, for 8 years before Obama and during Obama, we had no visibility and no help from our government.
And Eddie, I see that you're nodding there, and obviously we've heard Nancy outline the difference between the rhetoric and the reality on the ground in some of these countries. In Mexico, for example, we also heard on Twitter from Imadera saying, this is the reality. The undocumented that are returned by ICE are dropped off at a bridge in the middle of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. And then if I continue, she goes on to say, then they walk confused between people going to shop, work, or school. Then in the federal inspection station, they're searched. And this is how she finished it, saying, and treated as if they came back from shopping. Any valuables are confiscated unless they pay a fee. How does that resonate with you? And what did you make of Nancy's description as well as this one?
With what Nancy said, I just got to say that if we're talking about governments, I guess I grew up more on like the reality side of things. I grew up in a tough neighborhood where I grew up, it was always, you know, you kind of would see how the good areas are the good areas and the barrio, your barrio is the barrio. Like basically, even the guys that grow up in the neighborhood, the minute you try to do good and you try to act better or whatever, that's what they see it as, you're acting better than them. So the reality, what I'm getting at is this. The reality is that you got to do things for yourself. And I think I kind of have more on that. My mindset is more that I got to do for myself and not worry about the government, what's going on, because politics in these countries like Mexico or El Salvador are pretty much just like any other country. I see what's happening in the United States. So if you're going to try to wait for the government to try to help you, I think that's the first thing you should not do, is worry about what the government's going to do for you. It's more about what you're going to do for yourself, for the fact that they already have they're already messed up. And, you know, when it comes to elections is when they try to go pass out cup of noodles or, you know, brooms to help out this, you know, the poor neighborhoods. But I see it more like if your family wasn't perfect, what makes you think the government's going to be perfect? So it's one of those things where you have to do for yourself, and you got to figure out your situation. And I've started an English school here.
I'm glad you brought that up, Eddie. I just pulled up a picture here on my laptop here of English School, the training center, a prime example of you doing for yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty much, I did work at a call center, and call centers are fine, but it gets to a point where a lot of people that work at call centers have done different things in the United States. So we have people who probably were, you know, in the construction field, and for them to sit in an office and be, you know, confined to a chair answering calls, that's kind of like a burden, or it bugs them for a while, or until they get used to it. It's either that or try to go do construction work, which in this country, manual labor is not paid like in the United States. Over there in the United States, you get paid pretty good if you do something. Manual labor gets paid well. Here in El Salvador, anybody would like, hey, I'll do it. I'll do it for like how much? $5? Give me some food and you know, $5 and I'll do it. So a lot of the guys that do construction work or electricians or welders, they don't make much money here. So the best thing they try to do is go into a call center where you can make good money if you're single. But well, in El Salvador, here we make about nowadays we make about 600 a month to work at a call center. So that's good if you're by yourself and you live, and
Eddie,
that's paying for a
I'm just, as you're hearing and talking about, the different options that people have, I hate to interrupt you, but I couldn't help but wonder, this is obviously specific to Mexico, El Salvador, these countries we're talking about, but I had to share with you before, we run out of time here, this video comment that came in from Sofia, and I would love, Roque, for you to just kind of put this into context for us, because it talks about, the challenges with identity around the world, really, not just here, right on the border. So take a listen to what Sofia sent us.
One of the biggest challenges for Cambodians deported from the United States is the integration into Cambodian society, as most of us face culture shock and find it difficult to adapt to our new environment. Part of the problem is that we are stuck in between cultures because locals see us as foreigners and foreigners see us as Cambodians.
That is good. That's exactly what happens in El Salvador. So that's exactly what happens. I mean, if let's just say you grew up in United States and you grew up with a bunch of white guys in a white neighborhood, you act more white. If you hanged around with a bunch of Mexicans, you have more of that Mexican thing. So if you hanged around with black guys, you have that. I've known guys that have gotten killed for acting too black here in El Salvador.
Right, and Roque, I don't know if you have any thoughts to kind of contextualize that.
Roque is nodding his head kind of vigorously there, okay?
No, I mean, I think that it's interesting, not only that, because it's something that happens to this whole sort of generation of mass migration, right? That we have identities that are sort of between two cultures. And then when you add in the fact that someone then gets deported, you have culture shock, like the person in the video was commenting. You also have all sorts of sort of bureaucratic barriers, just little things like getting your degree validated can all of a sudden be a big challenge if you want to go back to school or go back to college or get a job. So, I think it's one of the things that's happened in the last, 30 years, 40 years since we lived in this age of mass migration, is that the border is really very meaningless to a lot of people. We're very global people, and a lot of people whose lives span both borders, right, or multiple countries, don't necessarily feel 100% at home in any one place.
I like that you said spanning. I wanted to skip this in because I like that Roque said spanning both borders. So I pulled up on my screen here a picture that really embodies that. Hector, this is your daughter. Tell us about your daughter.
Sure, my daughter is 11 years old, and well, she's I miss her very much, and I think that's one of the most important things that as far as the deportation is being separated from your family. We can all identify with that, and we can all identify that that's the reason we want to go back. People migrate for a better life, but at the end of the day is you migrate for your family. It's really the most important thing is family, and that's what we want to get back to. And I don't know, it's very, very difficult being separated from your families. That's really the identity, the pay, and everything is
what's happening with Hector is what I try to avoid by not having kids over there. I could have had kids. I was married already over there. We got divorced. I also had like a girlfriend that was pregnant or whatnot. But what I'm getting at is that we had to make a decision with one of my girlfriends to hey, do you really want to have my kid? Because what's going to happen is that sooner or later I'm going to get deported, and we're going to have that situation where my son's
Eddie, I want
to
to talk about that conversation in our post show because I'd like to know what she said and how you're dealing with that. We're out of time for our main show, but the conversation picks up at stream.aljazeera.com. You won't want to miss it. We'll see you there. Welcome back. We're in our online post show. We've been talking about the challenges people deported from the United States are facing. Let's get right back to it. So as we entered into the post show, Eddie, you were telling us about really difficult conversation you had to have with your significant other about the fact that you might be deported. What did that look like? What did she say? And how do you deal with that?
Well, most of the people already knew I was fighting a situation that knew me, for the fact that at the time that I got deported, I was doing the whole music production, and that's what I was doing. I was all in. I had my recording studio. I couldn't work for anybody. I tried to work for somebody. They already had chased me out of the animal hospitals. At the animal hospital I was working at, so I barely got away from that. I had to sell my home. I pretty much had to do a lot of things to not be on paper. In other words, kill the paper trail. I was on the run for about 8 years before they got me. During that time, they actually raided my recording studio. My recording studio, the electricity bill was under a friend of mine who had a brother who was involved in a shooting with an officer. So that brought you could say, the heat on my recording studio. And when they started investigating my studio, they saw me and they wanted to know who I was. So they chased me around. They were following me around until one day they tried to stop me. And of course, I knew I was going to get deported. So I tried to take off on my truck, and they crashed into me, and then I got deported. But I guess my point, what I'm getting at, is that I knew I was going to get deported. A lot of people around me knew I was going to get deported.
Right.
My close friends knew.
So it's something
for
that's
the
always
fact that
kind
I
of
even
weighing
used to,
on you.
I even used to pay people to drive me around. That's because our company was successful. We worked with a lot of different music artists, like The Game is a recording artist that he used our studio
So
before he
I'm
blew
loving
up.
hearing Eddie's accolades here,
Yeah.
but though I know underneath that was the stress and the fear of not knowing if you would be kicked out of the country you were calling your home.
And this
It's
is
something people online.
Yeah,
sure
a lot of
talking
people,
about.
a lot of people focusing on what you ended the main show, Hector, with, which is family and the importance of family. And that's why I tried to cut you off there, because you know, we have Jose, a deportee who has since become a business owner in Tijuana, and he sent us this really poignant message, and I think it'll maybe relate to something that you'll all relate to. Take a listen.
I also wanted to say that that it's very important that family members that have relatives that have been deported, you know, don't lose hope in them, and you know, give them the support you can, and help them out. You know, it's important so people won't feel alone. We feel alone out here, so it's important that we get your support so we won't have to feel that way, and that way we have something to look forward to, and we don't lose hope in what we're doing, man. You know, thanks a lot, and you know, much love to all the families and that have deportees and that are helping them out and giving them that corner.
Hector, I see you kind of nodding in agreement, but when you hear that from Jose, I mean, what stands out to you? What's really important for people to understand about this, and why family factors in so much?
Well, you know, even when I went over there, I was a young kid. I didn't have a decision of where I was going, and none of us did. And eventually, we became Americans, and we have families back home. And again, this is the most important thing that we will continue to fight for. And we've had legislation introduced, and hopefully to get our deported men and women home. But there's 2 million something people, more than that have been deported. And if all these families, all these their friends and everybody stood up and decided to ask for a change, we'd be home. I think things would change. And but again, the most important thing is family and identity. I wear the uniform. I grew up listening to rap, and I watching G.I. Joe, and I wear this uniform probably because I feel more American than anything. But family and identity, very important, and you know, that's
Certainly.
So I wanted I wanted to share this tweet because Gladys is watching this show, and she says, I have complete sympathy for these folks, but if you've been in the U.S. 10, 20 years, what stopped them from applying for citizenship? Nancy?
Could I answer that one?
Oh, who is that, Eddie? Nancy, we haven't heard your voice in a while. Let's get Nancy first and then Eddie. Nancy, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that question highlights just how people don't understand immigration policy. I mean, before you can become a citizen, you first have to become a permanent resident. And to be a permanent resident, you have to have a legal relief or a pathway for you to do that. I mean, that's why there's been proposals for immigration reform since, you know, since the DREAM Act, but nothing has passed. I mean, so, I mean, this is the question is, I mean, when are we going to pass another immigration reform so people can have these avenues for legalizing themselves? I mean, and the other thing I wanted to say on this conversation on deportation is that most people are not ready or are not prepared for deportation. I mean, for me, it was very abrupt. It happened to me on the day I was detained. That's the same day I arrived in Tijuana with no family or friends to support me. And I think I definitely agree with Eddie's comment about we can't wait for the government to respond. I mean, most of us are here in this call because of our resilience and our survival and what we've done to help people in this situation. But at the same time, I think part of us is making the government accountable because public funds are geared towards programs that are supposed to help people. And Mexico being one of the countries that have so many immigrants, I mean, the largest in the world, and with so many people returning, and the fact that they're saying they're supporting immigrants, I think our duty is also to make them accountable and to highlight what they're not really doing to support us.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I just want to add there real quickly that I think is so important for your viewers to understand, if you go, a lot of people talking about family, right? Well, we have something on the level of nearly 6 million kids who have an undocumented parent, at least one, right? And so what happens is when people get deported, oftentimes they try to come back, but because you can't apply for a visa, many people will come back again illegally. And then what ends up happening, if you go to any federal courthouse in the Southwest, and then many jurisdictions even very far away, Nebraska, Colorado, go to any federal courthouse and you'll see people getting prosecuted for the crime of illegal reentry, which is a felony in the United States. So not only are people risking deportation, but also doing federal time for a minimum of 2 years, which can be enhanced depending on the criminal record. And I think it's just so important for people to understand that this is again the merging of the criminal justice system in here. The punishments they just go up exponentially, and there's really nothing that you can do to stop a lot of people who have children from coming back. They're going to do what they got to do to get to the kids.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I wanted to add about veterans, deported veterans, that most people think that citizenship is automatic when you join the military. It's not. You have to apply, and even the process can take some time. But the only time citizenship is guaranteed for somebody that serves in the military is if they die on the battlefield. They give them posthumous citizenship. That's the only way we can get it.
When it doesn't really matter, except that you can then be buried in Arlington Cemetery, the National Cemetery in Washington, D.C.
And regards to myself too, I got a life deportation. The only way I can return is if I die tomorrow, then I can be returned back to the United States. They're going to bury me in a national cemetery with all my military honors, and they're going to give my mom and dad an American flag and say thank you for your service.
Hector, I can't help but feel as though that reminds me of one of the first video comments we heard of where, I think Azul was talking about how they treat you like your dad, and then you're talking about, well, after you die, they end up treating you like a citizen. But maybe that's just my take. Quick question for all of you, very quickly. We have Jerry Love saying this for you. Do you hold the same position about the USA at heart as a state as before, or has it changed at all? Very quickly, Eddie, in your heart, how do you feel?
As far as the United States, it's not my country. El Salvador is my country, so I got to do the best I got to do the best I can here in this country. Except, the funny thing is that my connections to the United States are very strong. Everybody, all my family is a citizenship. To answer that question, why didn't we become citizens earlier, is because of lack of education in the hoods. My mom always stayed working, and a lot of people stay busy. So throughout the years you work and you're in the same place and you're not paying attention to the details until it hits your family and the way it hit me. My mom didn't believe that I was deportable when I told her I was going to get deported, when I was getting deported and when I was locked up. She was like, nah. She started laughing. I still remember her laughing like, you're crazy. You're not going to get deported. No. I told her, Mom, serious. I'm getting deported. And so it was tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that change of heart for you, Nancy?
Well, I mean, you have to remember that I arrived in the U.S. when I was 9, and I lived 20 years. So, I mean, I lived in the U.S. the longest, not in Mexico. But I think my heart has been always in the two places. I've always been Mexican, even when I was in the U.S. I mean, even though when I returned to Mexico, it was the first time I was questioned how much of a Mexican I was, because obviously with the way I speak and the way I think and the way I was socialized. But my heart is in both places. I mean, the only thing I do want to fight for is the possibility of being able to have an option of where I want to live, because I am a bicultural person, and so I should have binational rights as well, but immigration policy doesn't allow me that. So my fight is not only to improve the situation of people who are arriving in Mexico, but for people that want to return to their families in the United States who consider the U.S. their home. And I mean, it's a fight that we're going to continue to do, and hopefully with people in the immigration movement in the United States, they can support us in doing that as well. But I mean, I have a 10-year ban. I have 896 days left for that ban to end, and you bet I'm going to line up in the U.S. Embassy and apply for my visa to be able to go to the United States.
And that speaks volumes
wait
alone.
For Trump to be replaced?
Well, that's a whole nother conversation.
Hopefully by then.
Hector, any change of heart?
Sure. As far as me, I am a Mexican citizen. I learned to love Mexico more than over the years. But my home is the United States. That's all I know. And but I have life deportation, so I got to adapt and overcome and make the best that I can in this country. But I love the United States, and I want to be buried as an American. And I'm an American. I love my country.
Perfect place to end this conversation. I want to thank all of our guests, Nancy Landa, Hector Barajas, EDDIE ANZORA, and Roque Planas for joining us today. And of course, to our community, thank you for being part of this conversation. It continues, as always, online with #AJStream.